systems weren't talking to each other. And they hadn't planned for that. And so when they listened to the black box, the conductor was on the phone with another crew member, basically asking, where are we? He had forgotten, he had lost track of where the train was. And he knew that they were going to enter urban situation. They had to slow down at some point, but he had lost the timing. And what's also interesting in the background of the recording is you can hear two different alert systems going off, like, you know. And so that meant that this driver was so focused on the situation and panicked that these really loud alert systems were not helping. And that's where the cognitive engineering comes in, right? That's why if you were designing that cockpit, somebody says, you must design the perfect cockpit that no driver will ever crash this train. Like, what are you going to do if two loud alerts are not working? You know, maybe you need an electric shock belt. I don't know. What are you going to do, right? So that they will shake them out of the tunnel vision and the panic. All right, so we talked about the Spanish train crash. There's all the links if you want to learn more about it. So the train was going 195 kilometers per hour. There's this famous model about information processing. And in the early days of human factors, they were approaching human beings like the human beings were machines that need to be calibrated. Like, how fast can this person react? And how fast can you see? And how many colors can you see? And they would study the humans with a microscope and a timer. And these folks figured out that, let's see, does this work? Yeah, I'll point. That if I say, I'm going to sit you in front of a computer and I want you to push the button as fast as you can when you see the light come on, then that means your visual system has a perceptual processor. It's about 50 to 200 milliseconds. And then it goes up and you have a visual memory and you have auditory memory that are separate processing buffers. So if I'm looking for a light, I go to visual memory, and that takes about, that's a big range, 70 to 1,000 milliseconds, so it could take a lot. But if it's just detecting a red light, that's pretty small. And then I'm going to go for cognitive processor, where I've got this rule, like if red light appears, then push. And then I send out the push signal, and then my motor system, my neurons down my arm, take about 30 to 100 milliseconds. So human reaction time is about half a second, about 400, 500 milliseconds, maybe 370 if you've had a lot of coffee or tea, right? And in that time, when you're going 195 kilometers per hour, you've just traveled a fair amount. So it's hard, some things are just impossible to react to. So in the early human factors days, they've got these calibration models of how people work. And they thought, once we figure this out, we will solve all the problems. And we will understand why fighter pilots are making mistakes and why the people managing the nuclear plants sometimes make mistakes and make the wrong decision. And as you might guess, this didn't solve all the problems. Like they did analyze this, but it's not fully there yet. And so some of the things we're talking about, I mentioned earlier, like what is cognitive engineering for? And if we want to augment humans, right, reduce errors. You can read this yourself, right? But the point is, this whole field is about work. It's not about making your joy at home better. It's about the workplace and improving your work. So reducing errors, faster tasks, and augment your powers. And this applies in some of these settings. You're going to hear AI come up every once in a while. And I mentioned earlier how we know how to fix machines, like with a screwdriver and a wrench, but it's harder to fix humans. And what's interesting about AI is it's somewhere in between that, right? The AI is getting more and more human-like. And you have these mental models of like, ChatGPT. Do people here use ChatGPT or Claude, or what do people use? Yeah? ChatGPT. Claude is the British version from Anthropic, and there's a bunch of others like Copilot and Gemini. So I'm not saying it's human, right? But it's more human. So now there's a whole new field of human AI teaming, or HAT. And so people are starting to think about that. Here's a little introduction from me and different things, but you heard a lot about me already, so I'm going to skip that. But these are my topics of interest. And so today we're going to do a couple of these topics, which is a little bit about how does the human brain deal with all this stuff. So Chris Witkins is a famous person in this field, and he said, look, we need to analyze not only how people do their work normally, but how they do it when they're really stressed out and there's unusual circumstances. And in his mind, if you plan for the weird circumstances where there's extreme failure or unusual conditions, then the normal circumstances are easy. So he was always seeking, like, let's plan for the extremes. And he has this basic thing about attention. Attention is weird. I think the cognitive science people and the cognitive engineers have not figured out attention and really how it works in our brain and the neurons. But they know it's basically two things. It's either a fuel or a filter. So if you've been in a room that's really crowded and everybody's talking, and somebody still says, okay, what was the name? Was it Nitesh? No, Avnish. I was trying to get your names. And I got a nice list here from the professor. Okay, tell me your name again. Cyan. Yeah. Okay, so in the crowded room, and somebody mentions cyan, you're going to hear it. Like your brain is listening unconsciously, and you're talking about yesterday's game or something like that, and somewhat way far away in the room, somebody's cyan. You're like, nah. Okay, so that's the filter part, right? But then the fuel part is the thing about like, I need more attention, or maybe I had a little too much to drink, so I shouldn't be driving. I don't have enough attention to do the driving task, right? And so there are some, again, these same people who are calibrating how fast you can work have done these models of attention. And you say, well, I've got a little basket of attention. I've got so much attention, and how can I spread it out? And I do some for perception, like what's going on around. And I do some for decision making, like, oh, which person do I talk to next at the party? Or which decision do I make at the computer? And then you're going to respond and do that sort of thing. So there's this model, and I'm always asking my students, who cares? Like when you see this model, what I want you to think as students is, do I care? Do I care about this model? Does this model help me? And the reason models like this sometimes help is when you see people's mistakes or errors, and you think, oh, maybe that's because this block of the model failed. So when models are really useful to me is when some block fails. I say, okay, what if I can't do decision making because I'm drunk, or I can't do decision making because I'm really tired. I'm a pilot and I'm flying too many hours, so I'm really tired. So I can't do. So what sort of things are going to happen, right? So the models get useful when you can block out a block and then decide, all right, then this model predicts what's going to happen. Okay, here's a model of memory. We had memory down here. Working memory and long-term memory. There are some people who believe intelligence can be calculated by how much working memory you have, right? And the long-term memory, I think about the kitchen. You're preparing food at home, right? And your long-term memory is your pantry and your cabinets and where you store all the food. And then, oh, tonight I'm going to make some supper, and I bring out ingredients and I put them on the counter and I start making some food. So that's the working memory. So if you have a tiny counter, it's hard for you to host 20 people for supper. Like, I just don't have enough counter. And if you have a tiny working memory, it's hard for you to make a lot of big decisions, right? We do know about memory, and this is an ancient diagram from the 50s and 60s when they were calibrating humans to figure out memory. We know that you have visual memory. Visual spatial sketchpad is the fancy name for the visual memory. The phonological loop is the fancy name for the auditory memory. And the episodic buffer is a piece of, like, what has happened to me? Do I remember that I talked to you yesterday? And do I remember that I talked to you 2 days ago, 3 days ago? Sort of history memory. Okay, so when you're successful at the filter, you are able to, select certain things, remember certain things. When you're successful at the fuel, then that means, I can divide my attention. I can do driving and I can play music in my car. Right? Or I can do driving and I can talk to my friend. My personal advice to you is to not have highly emotional conversations while you're driving. Right? So it's fine to talk to your friend and say, I'll meet you at 6. It's not as fine to negotiate a pay raise with your boss on the phone in the car, because you need more resources to do that. It's not so good to talk to your grandmother who maybe is mad at you about something, right? Like, emotions are going to take up some attention resources, so try to save those and drive better. Okay, how many people have seen this basketball video? Has anybody seen the basketball? Okay, so really see it. So don't say anything too much. We're going to watch this video. Let's see if it works. And full screen it.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
Okay, so do this. Watch for the players in white. Count how many times they pass the ball. There's a ball. Players in white. Count the players.
correct answer is 16 passes.
Okay, how many people got that? Okay, so a lot of people got it, that's good. How many people noticed the gorilla? Anybody notice a gorilla? And some people are like, what? So, yeah.
Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
Okay, so Daniel's son, I'm not going into this. So Rhea, had you seen the curtain one? Have you seen this version? Okay, so she's seen it all. That's fine. But there's an older version of the video that doesn't have the curtain and the black player leaving, and then people are like, what? So this is an example of attentional blindness. So if I ask you to focus on white players, you're looking at white pixels. You're not going to necessarily pay attention to a black gorilla, right? And it's a good reminder that our eyes are not video cameras, right? We're walking through the world. If we were really video cameras, we would be absorbing everything and it would just blow our brain. You know, it's like there's so much going on. And this also happens if you see car accidents, right? So maybe some cars crash an intersection and you don't really see what led to it. But if people are like, what happened? You might say, well, what you did see is like this red car and this blue car, and the blue car was like dented and over here, and you saw that part. But then your brain will start to invent a story of what happened, because our brains love stories and they love coherence. And so you'll start to fabricate stuff out of information you didn't really see. And it's a little dangerous, right? And so as you begin to figure out this human stuff, like what are the humans doing? I'm trying to analyze that train driver. I'm trying to analyze teams at work. What are the humans doing? You have to watch out that people aren't really paying attention. They're not often reliable, right? And I'm not saying they're lying, but they're not always reliable sources. So this is an example of my not knowing Windows as well. Okay. Oh yeah, one more. Have people seen this one with the door and the guys? How many people have seen it? Okay, well I'm going to summarize because we're a little behind. But basically, this guy stops and asks, so here's a member of the research team. He stops and asks this older gentleman, can you give me directions? And the older gentleman's like, oh yeah, you go over here and you spend. And while he's asking for directions, friends of this guy come along with a large object, move it between them, and they switch humans. So this guy turns into this guy. Now, see, they look pretty similar. So you could sort of give the benefit of the doubt. And the point is the old guy does not notice because he's focused on the task of giving directions. And then that was the original study. And then if you go later and you start clicking these other two videos, you start to see that they'll start to switch with race. Like it'll change from a white person to a black person or a Latino person. And there's one even who doesn't notice gender switching. Like you would think you would notice that, but it really doesn't. And so Daniel Simons talks about how your brain is focused on a certain task. And if your task is giving directions, then your task may be located in a context, but the context is like, oh, a person is asking me for directions. The details of the person don't really matter. And so when you're analyzing the workplace, right, you need to know what are the contexts that people are paying attention to. So I know Prof. Mohit is working in like turbines vibrating and fixing and this sort of thing. I don't know if humans are ever involved. Are there ever humans involved or not so? So maybe if there's a human who's supposed to notice something, maybe I'm a pilot. I don't know if a pilot is really aware of the noises that might warn the pilot of a problematic engine. I don't know. So you would, in a cognitive engineering situation, you would go and you would try to figure out, okay, here are the problems the pilot might encounter. Are they even paying attention to the cues that might happen? And if they're not, then you're going to have a problem. You're going to need to come up with a different way to build alerts. Okay, the next thing you need to know about System 1 and System 2. Do people know about System 1 and System 2? Anyone? Okay, so System 1, these are two parts of your brain. And the System 1 is automatic, and it goes instantly. And System 2 is when you have to think hard and figure something out. And we've got both of these parts of our brain, and they sometimes conflict with each other. So what's nice about automaticity, if you think about how much of your attention, right, we're using, if I have something that's automatic, like maybe I'm a musician and there are some music pieces I know so well they're just automatic, or I'm a cricket player and I know how to bowl just so it's so automatic I don't even think. And then you're going to get high performance with low attention, right? But if it's something you have to practice, and I say, cook that recipe from your grandmother, and you've only done it once every 10 years, you're like, oh, I got to really think, I got to read, and I got to, it's going to, your performance will rise with more attention. Okay, this guy. It doesn't take long for your brain to say, this is an angry person, right? Your brain is just like, bang, that's an angry person. It didn't take work. It's not like you said, I need to figure out what emotion this person has. Right? It's just instant. So that's System 1. That's automatic. Similarly, you could look at this and say, oh, they look hot. It's not a lot of effort. It's just instant, right? And it's automatic because you've grown up processing facial emotions. I should say back in the face emotions, for people who are on the autism spectrum, they sometimes don't do faces, right? So not everybody can do that, but most people. Okay, my clicker is, I have old batteries. All right, but for the hot, if you've grown up with a hot area, then it's going to be instantly hot. If you grew up in Canada, maybe you don't recognize this instantly as hot, right? But most people, they have this automaticity from practice. But if I tell you to do this, it's probably not automatic. I don't know, does anybody do this automatically? There are some humans out there who are instantly like, oh yeah, here's the answer. And it's automatic for them, but they're few. So you have to follow an algorithm in your brain. You have to follow a procedure. Or if you say, I'm going to buy a robotic vacuum. I'm going to figure out the best one to buy. And now I've got 8 or 10 dimensions of variables to optimize. Like, this is another System 2 problem, right? So when you are thinking about designing things and about users of your system, are they going to be able to get automatic? Ideally, you don't want to have them to do too much System 2. And there's a famous study that, some people will characterize System 1 as like the gut emotional part of your brain that's just sort of raw and like prehistoric. And the System 2 is more like the intellectual, Homo sapiens part of your brain. Well, here's how fragile the System 2 is. There's this famous study, and they walk you in a room and they say, here's a number, I want you to memorize this number, and then walk down the hall and tell it to the person at the other end of the long hall. And so you're having to walk down the hall like 257, 257, 257. But in some people they give a 3-digit number, and some people they give a 12-digit number, right? It's really hard. And everybody, they're walking down the hall, and they have this attractive woman come out with snacks, and it's either a chocolate cake or a healthy fruit dish. And she'll say, would you like a snack down the hallway? And the interesting thing is that the people with the 12-digit number choose the cake more. And this is the issue. The assumption is that your brain sees the cake and it's like, I want the cake. The primitive System 1 is like, I want the cake. And the System 2 might be like, the fruit is healthier. You should have the fruit. But the System 1's like, I want the cake. So if your System 2 is occupied with a 12-digit number, it's gone. Like when it comes to the cake fruit decision, it's occupied, it's busy, it's not helping you. So your intelligent Homo sapiens part of your brain can be overridden by a cake, right? So this is a little scary. What this means is that if you're making decisions in the future, like what job you're going to take, whom you're going to marry, whether to leave, big life decisions, right? You don't want to be handicapped by tiredness, fatigue, emotion, being drunk, you need to have all your System 2 ready, right? So that's sort of a caution. And this is a caution for your users too. If your users are working in a factory and maybe they're going to be fatigued or tired, you need to make sure they're not using System 2 a lot. Okay, So let's think about some design issues that come from this. And some of the optional readings I've got out there, we'll talk more about this. But we talked about the train conductor. These alerts are going off and he's not hearing them. So, how are we going to do alerts? And there's some basic design principles. Is the alert really salient? Is it different than the background? Is it expected? Like, has somebody trained them? Like, when you hear this alert, it means this. Is it foveal? So in our eyes, we have the fovea, which is a really narrow center of your view, and that's the highest resolution part of your eye. And you can try this with a friend later, if you want. If you go and get like a colored object, like you have crayons or pens that are different colors. Here's a pen. And maybe it can be a red pen or a blue pen. And you have a friend stand behind you and slowly bring it forward. You look straight and then slowly bring it forward. There's a point in your vision when you can see there's a pen and you don't know what color it is, which is a little weird because your cones are in the middle of your eye with the high resolution. The rods are out on the side, and they just know about, is something out there. They're black and white. The cones are black and white. So if it's a color, you won't know what color the pen is, even though you can see it's a pen. So you can try that if you want. The other great thing is that we are so visual that if you can get alerts to be auditory or tactile, then it's better because it's not taking up that bandwidth, right? I'm focusing with my eyes on where to drive this car that's maybe swerving, and if I can have alerts that are auditory or buzzing me, a lot of now the extra safe cars, like I was driving a rental car recently, it was a brand new car, and it had these vibrating parts under my bottom. I'm driving and it's like when I'm backing up, if I'm getting too close to the car behind me, it's like, and it's backing up the back of the seat. So it's doing all these things that are different sensory modalities. Okay. Oh yeah, and banner ads on the web are a good example of how to get your attention too, right? Because they know how our visual system works. They know that jitter is a popular thing. So we have neurons in our brain tuned just for detecting jitter and just for detecting rotation. So you'll see like spirally things or jittering things. The arrangement of the display, right? So if I have 6 features of my smart home and I want to adjust the power or the alarm system or something like that, am I going to arrange them alphabetically? Am I going to arrange them based on how frequently I use them? Am I going to arrange them based on, like, what would I arrange them by, right? So there's different decisions you have. And you typically want to group them by task and maybe frequency, right? So if there's further away buttons, yeah, those are going to be less frequent. You can think about this on your phone as well. Where are the buttons on the apps, right? Like on Android, the back button is always in the same place. On Apple, the back button's always also in the same place, but in a different place than Android. But the buttons are often arranged for your thumb to reach them, right? Another set of design principles is about visual search. If I give you a lot to look at, that's going to take cognitive load. So ideally, I want to highlight things for you. And there's a whole bunch of things called Gestalt principles. You can look them up. And this is an example of a Gestalt principle where when you have things that are similar, because this is a different angle, it immediately pops out. Right? And so if I want to get your attention, I want things to pop. Right? So there's 6 or 7 Gestalt principles you can use that will show that sort of thing. Some more in the readings. Okay. All right, we're going. My aim is to go to 12:30. Is that all right? Okay, so we'll go to 12:30. We'll get you know. Here's a new topic. Here's a picture from Iowa. You get a flavor of Iowa to divide over topics. Okay, multitasking. So Chris Wickens on multitasking again. So he will argue, and other people argue, that there is no such thing as multitasking. It's really just about swapping. And here is the list of ways that you can tell whether something can be easily swapped. So if I have a really difficult task, it might be hard to switch between that difficult task and another very difficult task. But if I have 2 easy tasks, it's easier to switch. If I have a higher priority task, so these are all factors that affect how well I can switch. And there are people that try to build computational models of this and predict, oh, here's some software that my users are going to be using. Here's a pilot, and in the pilot's cockpit, here's what they're going to be doing. I have modeled all their tasks and I can predict whether they will multitask or not. And sometimes that works, actually. These models, when you get something like a pilot in a cockpit, cockpits look complicated, but you can actually list out all the things the pilot's going to do. And it's a long list, but you can list it out. If I said do this for surgery, it's way harder. There's just too many things to list out. But so in India, do people know the story of the Goldilocks and the three bears? Is this a story you grew up with? I don't know. Goldilocks breaks into a house with three bears, and they're different sizes, and eventually she tries the beds, and she's like, there's daddy's bed, and it's too hard, and there's mommy's bed, and it's too soft, and then the baby bed, it's like, oh, it's just right. So what you talk about the Goldilocks zone is when things are just right. It's not too strong. So let's think about task performance. How well am I doing on the y-axis? And task demand is how many of my resources am I using? So if I'm over here, I'm going to say your task today is to watch for bad guys that come in the door. You're going to be watching an array of 20 security cameras. But we're in a really safe neighborhood and no bad guys come in. You're going to be bored, right? So your performance is lower. So then when the bad guy finally does come, you're bored and you're not vigilant. So you're like, oh, I didn't notice the bad guy. So if you're not engaged, your performance is low. If I say you're going to watch for bad guys and there's like 50 bad guys because it's the bad guy conference today and they're all hoarding through the thing, you're overwhelmed, right? So your performance is going to be bad if you have too much demand. There's a video I'll skip for now. This is a video. There was a woman in the 50s in the US named Lucille Ball, who's a comedian. And in this skit, she's working in a candy factory, and the candy comes out, and it gets faster and faster, and she reacts in humorous ways. But it's a great example of cognitive load. Like she's like trying to deal with this candy. And part of what I just explained about the Goldilocks, another name for this is the red line, which is the red line is when the task demand is too big, and then you run out of resources. So you might hear people talk about, oh, we need to be in the Goldilocks zone. Or you might people say, you don't want a red line. Like you don't want to go past the time at which you can actually get anything done. Okay, so these are some videos about multitasking and how problematic it is. I'm going to skip them for now, but here's one of the key components. How many of you have had a good idea while you were maybe in the shower or like walking somewhere or running, maybe at the health club? Anyone had like a new idea? Okay, so what's going on there? What's going on is that you're not giving your brain any input. And when your brain is not getting input, it can work on consolidating ideas from your past experience and be like, oh, you had this experience, and there's this interesting puzzle you're facing at work, and it can put together things and present you with new ideas, and you're like, ah, that's great. So, there are people paid hundreds of thousands of dollars per year to keep you looking at this. Like, graduates from our programs are like sitting out in California getting paid $400,000 US a year just to keep you looking at the phone, because then that makes the company money. So it's hard to fight that force, right? And if you struggle with looking at your phone, like it's no shame if you're like, I need extra help. I need an app to control this timing, or I need a friend to tell me to stop, right? Because there are these well-paid people fighting that, and you can't beat them alone. But my point is, if you end up on the phone too much, there will be no time for the good ideas to arrive, because you'll be feeding your head. And you don't need to feed your head so much. You need to let your head process. Here's more on the multitasking. You can have on the left side things like driving and talking, because the switching is within seconds. So there are certain tasks you can switch within seconds, and that's good. Certain tasks you can switch within hours. I'm going to cook some bread. It's going to take several hours, but I can go read a book in between. And also, it's not that urgent with the consequences. I might burn the bread a little bit, but it's okay. So you can analyze this, and Salvucci and others in the readings, there's optional reading by Salvucci, they analyze this deeply. So if you end up designing a system that involves multitasking, it's worth reading this and figuring out these factors. Forced interruptions are better. So let's think about what happens when there's interruption. I've started my first task. My first task is solving this math problem. And then I get a second task. My phone rings. And I'm like, oh. And I have to I have an interruption lag where I have to say like, okay, wait a minute, I'm doing the math problem. Where was I? Okay, I'm going to write down where I was, or maybe it just goes away. And then I start the second task. I'm talking to my mom, and then I end the secondary task, and then I've got this lag where I have to resume the first task. Where was I? Right? So when you multitask, you have these two different lags, which are adding time to your burden. So really, you want to multitask as little as possible, because in the lags, you've got wasted time, and you've got potential for error. And the other studies from NAS that I put by those links, NAS shows that the people who think they are good at multitasking are often the worst. So it's like you think you're like, oh, Steven's talking about don't multitask, but I'm good at it because I'm young and I have a lot of coffee. It's like, no, don't do that to yourself. Okay. All right. So last thing I want to talk about in this little series, and then we'll take a stand-up break, is cognitive load. So we talked about the system 2 is the part of your brain that has to work hard. And you can imagine, if I give you a math problem, it's going to vary. Here's 2 different math problems. They're going to vary in the load. So some math problems are just harder than others, okay? And then how much mental effort do I have to give to the math problem? Maybe I'm focused on the math problem because it's an exam and that's all I'm focused on. Or maybe I'm trying to babysit my sister and I don't have my full attention. Yeah? So these are all going to vary in the cognitive load. So how hard is the problem? Maybe I don't try very hard, and then there's the performance. And there are these different kinds of load. So intrinsic load is how hard the problem is. So that's pretty obvious. That's like the internal load of the problem. The extrinsic load are how distracted are you? Are you sitting on the middle of a stock trading floor and people are yelling all around you? Or are you sitting under a calm tree and you are not distracted externally, right? And then the germane load is about schemas. And so schemas are like mental models that you have. So if you go to a restaurant, you've got a schema in your head about how restaurants work. Like I walk in, I find a menu, I order, the food comes, I eat it, I pay, I leave. Like there's a script that you've got in your head. And if you go to some fancy, weird new restaurant that changes that, you might be a little like, what's going on, right? So the more the problem fits into schemas that you've got, then the better it's going to be. And this gets to an interesting question when you're designing a new system. Is it going to fit with people's existing schemas? Now, you can be Steve Jobs, and when you introduced the iPhone, it fit with nobody's schemas. Nobody had ever seen anything like this. So that's a learning curve, but he also loaded it up with enough coolness and emotional appeal that people are like, I don't care. I'm going to shout for victory that I have this phone now, and I'm the cool kid on the block, and I'm going to learn it, right? So sometimes the cognitive load of something new is okay. Sometimes it's not. This is a cool video I recommend watching if you're interested in this. This is Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize winner for System 1 and System 2. He talks a lot about those systems and how they work. And this is a talk he gave at Google, and I didn't actually mean to launch it. But it's really good. So I'm going to stop it. And we're going to go back.
When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion.
I'm really interested in how different Windows and Mac are, because I'm used to Mac. Okay. So here's the capacity of attention. This overlaps with the attention a little bit. So maybe I've got calling my mom requires 5 brain points. But if I'm time pressured, I need more. So, mom says, call me now. Then I'm like, oh, I'm going to do 7 points because mom sounded urgent. Mom sounds like she's worried. Maybe, hey, call me when you can. Then it's less mental load. And then you end up with this problem of, let's say you're driving, and driving takes 5 points, and the calling takes 5 points, but if it's call with no pressure, that's easy. Maybe it's normal call, but you're almost loaded. If it's call urgently, you're going to be overloaded, and you're going to start having risks of crashing. There is this NASA TLX survey. It's 6 survey questions. People often use it when you read the literature about how stressed are you. And now let's decide that you are going to actually go out. This is all theory so far.